City of Stevens Point Historic Preservation Design Review Meeting, recorded April 7, 2021.
All right, if looks like it's 2 o'clock, Chair, if you wanted to start the roll.
Yep, go ahead.
All right, Seibert,
Here.
Jennings,
Here.
McComb,
Here.
Scripps,
Here.
DeBush,
Here.
McFarland,
Here.
and Kamer.
Here.
All right, we got a quorum.
Okay, report on the March 3rd meeting. Are there any questions or additions?
I have a correction. It lists me as being excused. I was actually present, but I had some connection issues and made me slightly tardy.
Okay, I can change that, Adam?
Absolutely.
Okay, anything else? I would entertain a motion to accept the minutes with that one change.
I'll move to accept.
Is that Sarah? Who said that?
Sarah, sorry.
Sarah. Okay, a second, please.
Second.
Okay, Mr. DeBush. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Okay, moving on to number 3. Is Mr. Welling present?
He is not, I don't see. I know he did call me, believe, either on Thursday or Monday, and he was trying to make it, but looks like he's not on right now.
Okay, you want to go ahead and explain it then, Adam?
Sure, absolutely. So the applicant, as the chair mentioned, is requesting a design review to replace the rear exterior wall, which is situated on the northern side of the building. So to give a little backstory here, a design review was obtained, if the commission recalls, back in 2018 to replace the same rear exterior wall. However, the original design back then called for a storefront addition. Now, subsequently, the plans for having the storefront tenant has not come into fruition. So as such, the applicant is requesting a modified design review, which will call for a like-for-like replacement of the rear exterior wall, except with the one exception being removing the one door, one unaccessible door, I should state, that is currently located on the northern facade. So here are just some pictures showing this rear wall plus some other portions of the building just for context. So looking at the one on the lower right, on the lower left-hand corner shows the full extent of what we're talking about. So this door, as I mentioned, is not accessible. About a few years ago, when there's the last time that permits were issued for this building, they did, the applicant, upon working with the building inspector, did change plans to install a door on the northwest corner. Just can't see it out of this picture, to compensate for this door here, which doesn't meet applicable building code requirements. So as such, while a door is located on the building, it is not in operation. Just some historical photos. So this is relatively unique in that back in the 1930s, this area, the building, the extent of the building was essentially where it is located right now, roughly where my cursor is. The image on your left-hand screen is using one of the city Sanborn maps from 1950. You can see sometime during the 1940s, the building roughly doubled in size, as you can see, extending out as far back as here. And then, of course, an older picture of the mall downtown, with the subject property being located right here. So roughly between, likely during the time when the mall was constructed, this little section here was demolished to allow for this building essentially to be separate from everything else. So the next slide here, you can see images of the request. So you can see the top image shows what's existing. You can see the door. And then the bottom here will be what is proposed. So like I said, it's a like-for-like replacement, except for the removal of the door itself that currently exists. So overall, staff does recommend approval of the design review subject to the conditions shown on your screen. I guess maybe I should state before I send it back to the commission, some of the key points here for conditions is that if any construction work, the housing of materials, equipment will need to be located directly to the north of the building on the sidewalk and within the city parking lot, that the applicant will need to obtain proper approvals from not only the Public Works Director, but also the Executive Director of the Redevelopment Authority to, like I said, to obtain proper approvals to allow for construction equipment, things like that to be located on the premises. So with that, I'll kick it back to the chair with any questions.
I have one. Go back to the drawing.
Sure.
Now, on the top one, it's brick, and on the bottom one, is that cement block?
So that was one of the, so it is masonry. It is actually, and actually this is one good thing to mention too. So one of the unique parts about this request, or about this building overall, is that the facade from the southern half of the building, so what you see on Main Street, is different from essentially this expansion roughly from where my cursor is now outward. So the request does call for masonry to be used as part of the design review request, but the request for repairing the rear wall will try to emulate, or closely emulate, the facade on the southern half of the building that you see along Main Street.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, seeing none, entertain a motion to accept the proposal with the approval of the staff.
I'll move to approve with staff recommendations.
Okay, a second, please.
I'll second Mary McComb.
Thank you. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay. Then how about Mr. Cook? Is he available?
Let me check and see if he's on.
Excuse
I don't
me.
see him on the list, but I can give a quick rundown for this request. So as you can see on the agenda, the requests are separated into two, first of which being a design review, the second of which being relating towards a facade improvement grant request. So the applicant is requesting to replace the current green awning that's located on the subject property, the Tricor building, along with painting window trim, door trim, and other storefront wall elements to a tricorn black color, which I'll show you in subsequent slides what the color will look like. So the premise for this request is in part because the applicant is moving his business, Fall Line Outfitters, from 1336 Strongs Avenue to the first floor tenant space where the current Tricor Insurance building or use is. One thing to make note is that, as I'll show actually on the next slide here, is that the awning here will also include appropriate signage as well. The part of the awning on the southern portion of the building facing the square will outline the company name, whereas the awning that's facing west will include the logo for the business as well. So here, just showing an overview of some historical photos here. So you can see here, these two pictures on the left are the oldest, dated, as you see, 1976. You can see there's no awning situated on there. Actually, this area is split into two different tenant spaces on the first floor with, again, the apartment residential uses up top. So sometime from the looks of it, shortly after 1976 is when work was done to construct the current awning that you see today. So obviously this is a different store logo and store name on it, but the heart of the emblem, the extent of the awning, I should say, itself has been in existence since at least around the later 1970s. So overall, staff does recommend approval of the design review itself. And I will say, staff has been working with the applicant as far as the choosing of the color, paint color for the door and window trim, for the storefront wall treatments. And so that part has been approved and is not included as part of this design review. This will be focusing solely on the awning fabric and with the associated signage on top coinciding with it. So like I said, overall staff does recommend approval of the design review. Some of the main things that I should should note is that staff has been working again with the applicant and did receive dimensions on the signage itself and does meet specific sign code and design guidelines as far as how big and the specific location it can be located towards. And I guess before I kick it back to the commission, one thing that I wanted to address is the notion of more of the balloon type, more semicircular type awning. So again, I just want to reiterate that this proposal encompasses the removal and the replacement of the awning fabric. The structure, the shell of itself will stay the same as what currently exists. So overall, staff does recommend approval in part because the overall color going from a green to a black more complements the facade of not only the building, but whole square overall. Because one of the things that I noticed upon taking a visit down there is one of the things that's unique is that a lot of the trim colors, the secondary colors of all these buildings on the square tend to have the same dynamic, more of a black, dark gray, or a darker shade of color in general. So staff does feel that with the applicant requesting a black color in nature, that it does have more cohesion with other buildings on the square overall. So with that, I'd be happy to take any questions the commission may have.
So given the history of the building and the fact that this balloon awning is fairly new, do we have to have it at all?
The awning?
Yes.
Yes, and that would be because you can see the awning would be covering the below ground access underneath the building. So I don't think the applicant is on the call yet, but he can provide answers as far as what would be the intended use of the area below the ground. But in short, yes, the awning would serve that purpose and would be required for, would be necessary for that.
I'm sorry, Chairman. This is Ryan Karnowski, Director of Community Development. As it relates to the awning itself, from the historical context, does it need to be there? Probably, arguably not. However, the zoning code does allow for awnings within the historic district. Mm-hmm. And in fact, part of this request will be for the city to provide some assistance through our facade grant program for the awning itself. So to answer your question, doesn't necessarily need to be there from the historical aspect, but it is a allowed use with the approval of the Historic Preservation Commission, just from the aesthetic standpoint.
What about a more traditional awning instead of this balloon or semicircle thing?
I mean, that's, so as the director mentioned, both, like you said, the more traditional type awnings and balloon type awnings are allowed via the sign code, by the city sign code, and determined on a case-by-case basis through the commission's design guidelines. So both options would be applicable for the building here.
Well, Adam, I don't think that's the way that I understand the design guidelines. And in fact, the design guidelines specifically show this building and its awning, this balloon awning, as not a representative of a historical awning. And so I have concerns about this awning, in fact, too. I did a very quick Google before the meeting, and within 5 minutes, I found images of this building, certainly dating back before the images that you provided, that had traditional awnings on it. So I think to look back a little further and to see that this building in fact had awnings that we think are traditional, is much more accurate than going back just to 1976.
Yeah, and the specific guideline that you were mentioning, Commissioner, states that awnings should be placed on structures for which they are either historically accurate or which there exists physical evidence of previous treatment, essentially meaning that is there evidence in the past for an awning to be located on the premise or on the building here? And given the fact that the awning has existed on the building here since the late 1970s, that staff does feel that it would meet that component of the guideline, since there is the historical element to it, that awning has existed. And again, this is more so, this is not altering the, as I said, the shell of the awning itself. This design review is focusing on the fabric, the removal of the existing and the removal of the existing fabric itself. And as the commission, other members of the audience probably recognize too, is that, if you take a drive down by the public square too, the current awning it has a couple tears in it, is pretty significant in nature. So one of the benefits, at least in staff's eyes, is that this would address the more deteriorating nature of the fabric itself, and like I said, would overall complement the building well.
Go ahead.
I guess that I understand that there's that leeway, and then you can kind of make that argument that this has been here for quite a long time. You're leaving the substructure there. You're just putting a new material on it. But I guess I have a little bit of difficulty saying we're going to allocate city funds to do something to a building that really doesn't address or bring it back to to a more original character.
Yeah, and that's one of the points that I would make too.
I guess I would say if the owner wants to replace it at his own expense, then maybe I'd be a little more forgiving about that. But
an option for the commission would be to essentially table the request or request the applicant bring back an awning that's more traditional in nature, that's more historic in nature, as opposed to the balloon awning. That's definitely a request that you have the authority to make. And given, as the commissioner just mentioned, the city's financial interest in this as well, maybe that's something that the commission wants to do. That is an option, but I would leave it up to the commission.
And I guess I'd like to hear also of, functionally, I understand that issue with that stairways down, and I can see how a fixed awning provides a little, maybe better protection than an awning that's, more traditional, which are crank, which is operable, which maybe not be, I don't know if it's less sturdy, but I guess I'd like to hear from the applicant a little bit more of his explanation of why he's has this preference. So maybe tabling it also for him to be able to be present to explain if this is truly his preference.
We would need a motion to that effect based on Mr. Konofsky's comments.
Mr. Chair, there are two raised hands from Alder Jennings and Alder-elect Kamer as well.
Okay, Ms. Jennings.
I won't comment if this is going to be, I think postponed is actually the correct procedure. I won't comment. I do just want to say how this particular business owner, just what he has brought to the downtown. He is very concerned about historical buildings. If anyone's been in Fall Line, what a great space he's created, and he's seriously committed to the aesthetics of downtown. He'll be doing a lot inside as well to bring the building back. So I'm hearing the argument about traditional awnings, and I do think he needs time to consider that and the city will have to consider how much it will support. So that was kind of part of what I was going to say, but it sounds like this is going to be postponed.
Ginger?
Yeah, I have kind of 2-point comments. One was, I thought in the application or in the review from community development staff, there was a request for the applicant to submit additional bids or a secondary bid, and that the applicant himself wrote in his own application that he had a hard time finding vendors to do the awnings, and that there was only one viable one in central Wisconsin, and that he didn't think it would be cost effective to reach out farther than that. So I'm wondering, I don't know how easy it is to get vendors to do this type of work, or if that's a concern. And then, yeah, just to echo what Tori said too, Mr. Cook is a resident of District 3. He has a home on Clark Street, and he's put a fair amount of time and investment into that personal home on Clark Street. And I was excited to see that his business is doing well and that it's thriving, and that, he's investing in our downtown. And it looks like this building allows for expansion or greater square footage, I would imagine, from where he is now. And as much as the commission wants to encourage people to use this facade grant, it does seem like it would be, it would be helpful if we could work with him in some way to make this possible. So those are just.
Yeah, I understand. I trust that he is a good person, and I've been in the business. It is beautiful, but to be consistent, we have, I believe, we have been pretty adamant on some other businesses regarding their awnings right around the corner. I think that there's, was it Jim Lobb that owned the building right around the corner, where we were pretty persistent about the awning that he was putting up. The Gallery Q, I think we're really pretty firm about the awning that Ada put up there, and she was able to find 2 bids. So I think that, I think we have to be consistent in terms of what we're asking business to do, particularly about awnings. And I understand they're expensive things. So I guess that's just my opinion.
Anybody wish to go ahead?
Another question to staff. I know that he has an opening date, so postponing this ends up potentially impacting his opening. Is that correct, or?
That I would leave it up. I wouldn't be able to answer that facet. I don't know the exact, if there is a tentative date established for the applicant as far as when he plans on opening. So I would defer that answer off to the applicant.
Anyone else care to make a motion? Mr. DeBusch?
Well, I'd move to postpone and with the provision that so that applicant can be present, and the applicant pursue bids for traditional awning to be presented as an alternative.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you, Joe. I would also just like to say I'd be happy to sit in on the special session if we need to expedite the process. And I'm not sure if that's possible, but if this is something that's going to, postpone their opening date, if the commission could meet earlier to fast track approval, I'd be willing to do that for them.
Yeah, and that's something that staff can work with the commission, dependent upon, the availability of additional bids, additional renderings that the applicant can provide. Should the commission state that the applicant should have more traditional type awning. So yeah, staff can work with the applicant and work with the commission for scheduling the date if it needs to happen earlier.
We still need a second on Mr. excuse me, Mr. DeBusch's motion.
I would second.
Eric, thank you. Further discussion?
This is Mary. I need to recuse myself from this vote.
Okay.
I
Any
just,
others?
I just have one more sort of question, I guess. This is a large south-facing windows, and I think everyone can imagine the necessity of an awning to save on energy. So I can imagine what's going to happen here. The business owner will be put in a position of just having to take everything down. Anyway.
Okay, we have any other further discussion? Okay, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. It is tabled and further discussion on the type of awning. Thank you. All right.
I would actually then, not trying to cut you off, Chair, but I would then recommend for the next agenda item to postpone it as well, just since they coincide with one another.
Number 5 you're talking about?
Correct.
Okay.
In this scenario, just Mr. Chair, just recommend just not taking any action. There's no need to vote on it.
Okay. Well, let's move on to number 6 then,
All right.
which would be Mr. Booza's request for addition to his building.
Yeah, so to give a quick rundown, so the applicant is requesting the design review to allow for a vertical addition onto the existing piece-level building. So you can see provided some renderings from the applicant, shows the proposed addition, how it will look like at varying angles of the building itself, providing some historical photos of the site itself. You can see or looking at historical photos, the sense that I got and looking at past property records too is that there used to be more so a half story situated on top of the building that at some point back when that evidently got demolished or removed rather to what it currently exists today. So in a way, upon reviewing the request, staff, one of the reasons for approval would be that it would more so kind of revert back to how the building used to look like upon when it was first constructed. One of the points that, again, these are some pictures showing it as is, looking more at the blue colored masonry. One of the comments that was stated in the staff report as well was that the work, as you can see, some of the work was already completed, and that was completed without a building permit application being submitted, and neither with a historical design review application requested. So overall, staff does recommend approval with the conditions shown on your screen and within the staff report as well. Some of the main ones that I wanted to point out is that, staff would want to see what the proposed color of the addition would look like, and then have it be approved by staff to make sure that the paint color meets the commission's design guidelines. All the windows for this proposed addition are compatible in size, scale, material, detail, paint as the windows on the first story, and then all the other conditions that you see on your screen. So I know, Chair, the applicant is on the call as well, and I'm sure he'd be happy to take any questions if there are comments if he has any.
Anybody have any questions or comments? Okay. Seeing none, I would entertain a motion to accept the proposal with staff recommendations.
I'll move to approve with staff recommendation.
Ms. Jennings, thank you. Second, please.
This is Mary, so move.
Okay. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed?
Aye.
I'm sorry, opposed? Okay, motion passes. Let's see, number 7.
Yeah, so.
Okay, go ahead.
Sorry.
Sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, so as outlined within the agenda packet as well. As the commission recalls, the last few months, we've been discussing a variety of different goals that the commission would like to pursue in the coming years ahead, one of which being to submit nomination papers to designate a proposed area for towards the State and National Register of Historic Places. So to sort of quote unquote kick this goal off, one of the first things that staff feels should be discussed is what area is of interest for the commission for prioritizing in the future. So the image that you see on your screen is taken from the city's website based off of the 2011 Housing Intensive Survey report outlining the proposed historic district. So you can see the red outline here is a current locally recognized Clark Street Historic District, with the additional properties outlined in green being the Clark Street Main Street district that was already sent to the state and feds for recognition. So in short, the other 4 districts that you see highlighted are shown in yellow, blue, orange, and purple are the ones that are outstanding that could potentially be eligible for future review from the state on the state and national level as part of a nomination paper, as part of nomination submittals. So one of the things that I wanted to address before we get going on this is there was some interest from some of the commissioners as far as how each proposed historic district got its shape. And Tim Hagelin, the city's consultant back in 2011 and the years before that for creating the intensive survey report, how that process in short worked was that he took a review of all the buildings located within these defined areas and as outlined further in the report, essentially made a mock-up of, what's its architectural features of the building, other historic qualities, the overall neighborhood dynamic itself, and plotted each historic district based on his findings. And one of the big things to keep in mind when thinking about the shape of each of these proposed historic districts is continuity, and that each of these areas has to be relatively continuous in nature, that there can't be, spot property to not spot zoning, but kind of picking property from property as far as which should be located in a historic area. That has to be more of a contiguous form for each proposed area. So what the purpose of this discussion today is more so staff asking the commission to review these 4 proposed historic districts that are left, review it, and essentially determine which area would be most fitting for future nomination paper submittals. And this can be done, by reviewing the housing intensive survey report, by biking or walking towards each area and observing visually the buildings that are located within these areas, looking at historical records with the Wisconsin Historical Society. And then at a future meeting is where staff will be asking more so a formal directive as far as what area staff should prioritize for submitting nomination papers. And before I conclude, the main reason for that is more so for budgetary purposes, to help understand how much it would cost for reaching out towards a consultant, either through the RFP process, to determine how much it would cost for the consultant to do any necessary pre-work that would be needed, and then above all, actually submitting the nomination papers itself. So if there's any questions or comments that the commission has, at least for the interim, I'd be happy to answer them for you.
I've got one on Church of the Intercession. What is the status of that? It seems abandoned.
Status as far as its use, or as far as like a proposed historic district?
No, I'm wondering if it's threatened, and hence the historic district would take priority.
So, I mean, one of the things, in short, I don't know if it's quote unquote threatened or not. So I wouldn't be able to speak to that. You know, one of the important things to recognize too for state or for nomination papers too is that there's a misconception too. I know there's a misconception as far as, you know, an area being recognized on the state and local level. I know that happened for the Clark Main Street submittals, is that they would be subject to the design guidelines that this commission has. But however, submitting areas to the state and national register, a big quote unquote benefit of that would be each property being eligible for tax credits. So it doesn't lie the possibility that should an area be designated on the state and national register, that could be state and federal tax credits that individual property owners could be eligible towards. So that would be one of the factors that to consider as far as which area would be most fitting.
Mr. Chairman, just to kind of piggyback off of that, the church of the that you're discussing, is that the one on the Ellison Church Street?
Yeah.
So that's privately owned by a gentleman named Skip Meyer, who, I will say this publicly, has a very, very terrible track record of maintaining properties in the city. He's currently residing in the parlor, which was built, I think, in the 50s. I would argue that's probably one of the more threatened historic structures within the city. One of the things that the commission could consider doing is extending the local historic district to include these more threatened properties. And this commission would then, just like over the downtown area, have more authority over what occurs at those properties. As Adam alluded to earlier, the state and national registry is really for tax purposes, replacing windows, replacing roofs. Maintaining the building provides you some additional tax benefits if you live and do the improvements on a historic structure.
Well, the reason I bring it up is from a historic point of view, that was one of the critical churches. Everybody that was anybody in Stevens Point belonged to that church for many, many years. So it played a critical role in the history of the city. And I can't tell what's going on with the place. It just looks abandoned.
Yeah, the sanctuary area is not utilized. Like I said, Skip and his wife are living in the parlor area, but there's really, other than sending him orders on pieces that are falling into disrepair, there's not a whole lot the city can do at this point with that church. We are working on the demolition by neglect ordinance, which hopefully we'll have to sooner rather than later. And that will provide some additional protections and benefits to this commission when looking at historic properties like the church.
This is Mary. I've got some comments. Mr. Myers also owns that old church on the corner of Brawley and Strong's, which I did some research on it when I was still on Common Council because it was my district. The church is not eligible for historic status because the original steeple is not there. The steeple that's there now is attenuated, shortened. And it's a beautiful church. Those stained glass windows are incredible. And it is just going to rack and ruin under Mr. Myers' ownership. It may have been transferred to the county already. I don't know. But my understanding about the Church of the Intercession was that the diocese, the Episcopalians couldn't support it anymore because it needed a whole bunch of repairs, and I can't remember which kinds, which resulted in them selling it to Myers, and they're moving out to the east side of town. And I don't know the status of those repairs, but I agree with Tim that that's a real historic property, and we need to do whatever we can to protect it.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I could address a few of the commissioners' comments. So 1,700 Strongs, which is the former Lutheran church at Strongs and Brawley, that is in county ownership right now. It is likely it'll be transferred to redevelopment authority ownership in the next 2 weeks. And at that point, we would be doing a request for proposal for someone to either rehab or restore or redevelop the parcel. So keep an eye out on that one. As it relates to the issues at the church that we've been discussing, they had some issues with the steeple and needing tuck point repairs and roof repairs. And one of the big barriers was the power lines that run adjacent to the steeple. In order to underground them to do the work or temporarily relocate them to do the work that was required, it was in the ballpark of like $110,000 or $150,000. And unfortunately, Wisconsin Public Service was not too keen to be working with the church to help cover some of those costs. And between that and the age of the church, I believe that's part of the reason that congregation opted to move out to the east side of town. Those repairs have not been made as far as I'm aware.
Yeah, it's my understanding that the roof was the big problem.
Well,
the
I believe
interior is gorgeous.
that came up before the committee and commission. I believe there was discussion about needing to do the roof repairs and in a consistent way, in a manner using tiles that are appropriate to the roof. And I think if you have walked by there, and there's been some roof patching, and they're clearly not tiles that are consistent with the original tiles.
Mr. Chair, Alder Jennings and Alder Luck-Kamer also have comments.
Yeah. Tori?
Thank you. I really like the idea that was suggested by the director to expand the existing historic district to encompass the Episcopal Church or the church, so that then we can focus on these other 3 places or spaces. And it looks like we're being requested to rank them. So is it possible to, if the commission agrees, does it get sent back to staff to expand the historic district to cover the church? How would that work?
Adam? Or Mr. Konowski?
Yeah, if that's the request of the commission, what we would do is exactly that. We would put the other 3 or 4 proposed districts kind of on the back burner, look at the local district and at the expansion, and then we'd probably bring back a procedure on how that could occur and use the next 6 to 9 months to put that in place.
Okay. Ginger?
Thank you. Yeah, my question kind of piggybacks off Tori's. I was wondering if there was a recommendation to have this added to the historic district, would it be the downtown district? And is it adjacent to that, or would it be the Clark Main, or would it be its own separate entity?
That's something that staff's going to have to look at. It honestly could probably be either or.
Okay.
The specific church is almost right smack in between the Main Street and the Clark Street Historic District. I've kind of been arguing for not a few years, but a while now, that maybe the rest of the Clark Street, as you go down towards downtown, should be included as part of that. I mean, there are a number of homes on the west side of Division Street that are on Clark that are historic in nature and are included in the late Wendell Nelson's book, and that should be considered as part of that historic district as well. So
Sure.
That's something that we have to look at and kind of bring back to you and say, this is what makes the most sense. This is why, and let you folks make a decision.
Okay. Yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt, Mary. My last comment is just that I like prioritizing this area as well. I mean, just because it is kind of a finite, succinct block. And I think with the other districts, which I'd sort of mentioned to Adam and Mary and Tori, I have more questions about the Pine and Plover Street and the Church Streets, if those areas could be expanded to include more houses, and maybe they couldn't, but I feel like with that church block, it seems like a pretty easy, definable, isolated area to work with. That's already adjacent to other historic areas. So that's my final comment.
This is Mary. I have a question and a comment. Comment is that we already lost the St. Stephen's Convent from that block, which is a terrible loss. But also, what's the status of the Sanders House? Is that in the downtown district or what?
I don't believe it's within the downtown district. I think it's just like the church across the street from the Sanders House. It's in this weird undefined area. And if we were to expand the Clark Street residential historic district, we would probably include the Sanders home as well.
Yeah, I would hope so. I mean, I've been inside a few times. It's amazing.
And what about the Trinity Church going eastward? That's kind of unique. It's more modern, of course, but it's more unique.
It could be included. That was one thing that we had as part of the Clark Main Historic District, included the office building, which now hosts Brody Designs, as part of that because of its mid-century modern aesthetics and design. So it could be, if a consultant could justify it. That's where we've got to be pretty conscious that not everything that we want to include could be included because it may or may not be considered historic architecturally or historic locally. And so that's one thing that we would ask the consultant to put together. Just like Alder Kamer's comments, we could easily expand the Clover Pine district, but if we're looking for the tax credit benefits through the state and federal programs, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to look at some of those homes and say, yeah, those are historical, if we're unable to justify it, other than, hey, we want to have these included as part of that. Now, we could expand that locally, but the big thing there is, because there's going to be public hearings and public comment on it as well, that we can justify that this house and this house and this house should be included in the local designation, and here's why.
Ryan and Adam, as I'm looking at my manual, the downtown design review district already includes Church of the Intercession and all that area. It goes down to Ellis Street, Strongs. Am I misreading this?
I'm looking at an area.
Because I know that we discussed the Church of the Intercession when there was the prospect of them selling it, and
yeah, it looks like Rogers Street is the eastern boundary. Everything to the west of that falls within the design review district. Then, as the director mentioned, you have that space between Rogers and Division where it doesn't, and neither falls within the Clark Street district, nor does it fall within the design review district. So, which that would be an option on the table as well, is to expand it, should this commission choose.
So what is your suggestion here, Adam? Do we prioritize these or what?
If that's what the commission would like, that's something that, staff can take a look at and see, and kind of outline the next time this commission meets, procedurally, what would have to happen for expanding any locally recognized historic districts, and then get back to more so on a timeline for what to expect.
Any comments from commissioners? Okay, would it be possible to expand the what you're calling the Clark Main Street proposed district and just simply absorb the Ellis Street one, the churches, into that proposal?
You mean adding essentially this area to the downtown review district or the Clark Street district?
To the Clark Street, Main Street one, the kind of greenish blue. Just absorb the yellow into the greenish blue one?
So the greenish blue, this whole area is this Clark Street Main Street district that was sent on the state national register of historic places. The area that's
Okay.
outlined in red here, that's the locally recognized Clark Street district. So
Okay.
it could fall, it could be expanded to be included either in the Clark Street or within the downtown review district. If, again, should this commission choose to.
Anybody have any comments?
This is Mary. I think it should go in one of those. I'm not feeling competent to make a judgment which, but
Sure.
It sounds really logical.
Now, I'll add to that. So Ellis, so chairperson, it would basically square off Ellis to the church, right? And so
Yeah,
at
I think-
the corner of Ellis and Division Street, there's a historic home, right? That is not in the historic, the proposed historic district. However, it's a great old house. My house, I mean, there's another historic house. My house is actually one of the oldest in Stevens Point, although it doesn't look like it. It is in houses that grew. I mean, there are a number of homes on Ellis that it would be nice if this were just squared off down to the church. Does anyone have any interest in that?
Would that run into the problem Mr. Karnofsky was talking about in terms of justifying it?
So that would, yeah, Alder Jennings, you're saying your block, that would include likely the Lutheran Church on the corner of Clark and Rogers, and then connect it with the Myers Church of the Insurrection.
Insurrection.
Right.
Intercession.
Sorry, I was hoping somebody would catch that. January 6th on my mind. Hey, so yeah, you're saying those blocks as well. So 1600 of Ellis, 1500 of Clark, and connecting up with St. Steve's and the rest of those church areas too. Is that what you're saying, Alder?
I think so. I mean, basically Division Street to Church of Intercession.
Okay, I think that's doable.
Can I ask a question for clarification? Again, in my manual that I have on section 7.8, downtown review historic district, page 51. What's the difference between the historic downtown design review historic district versus the others that are designated historic districts? On this map on the downtown review historic district, it covers that whole area that we're talking about, and plus some down to, it goes to Rogers on the east, down to Ellis on the south, over past the Court Hard over to the river. What is this designation that I'm looking at? Can you clarify that?
Yeah, so I mean, that would be one of the decisions that would be up for the commission too, is this area essentially between Rogers and Division, should that be added to the Clark Street locally recognized historic district, or should it be included as part of the design review district? So as far as either option, both would be subject to this commission's design guidelines should, somebody want to repaint their siding, for example. The big difference would be is its designation as a locally recognized historic district as well, should the commission choose to include that within the existing Clark Street historic district.
I
That
think
answer it,
what,
Mr.
what staff
I
can
would-
what staff can take from this is there's an interest in adding it. We've got to provide some more information as it relates to how it could be done, why it could or could not be done, as an example for each property. And maybe that's where we start, and we bring that back to you during the next meeting to say, okay, you folks want the two churches on Clark Street and Strong's to be considered to be a part of a local district. Here's how staff believes that we can make it happen. And maybe the state and local, the state and federal districts kind of get put on the back burner while we focus more on the local districts and the expansion thereof.
Anybody have any objections to that?
I just have one question. So they cannot be done at the same time. Is that what I'm hearing?
They could be done at the same time, as far as I know. The state and federal process takes longer to do, mainly because of the application, just like we went through with the Clark Main District. The local one probably would take less time, but will be more. We'll have more involvement from the public and those property owners impacted.
Anyone else? Suggest then that you go ahead and see what you can do about putting that together, Mr. Konofsky.
Will do. Thank you.
Okay. Anything else, Adam?
No,
Do we want
that's-
to prioritize the other three?
No, I think as the director mentioned, we can take a look at the findings from a procedural standpoint, how it would work for the area identified, and then take it from there at the next meeting, more honing in more on how the commission would like staff to proceed going forward.
Okay. Anything else to come before the board? I think that's it then. Ready for adjournment? All right. Thank you, everybody.
And we are.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
A video of this meeting is available for viewing on the city's website, stevenspoint.com/videos.